My name is Layla Adams, and at 62 years old, I have learned that some lessons can only be taught through consequences that cut deeper than words ever could. I was sitting at my dining room table, the mahogany piece I'd inherited from my grandmother, when my pregnant daughter-in-law, Sophia, delivered the words that would change everything. Her hand rested possessively on the curve of her 7-month belly, the other drumming impatiently against the surface of furniture I'd paid for. "I don't want this old witch here while I'm pregnant," she announced, not even bothering to look at me directly. "The negative energy isn't good for the baby." My son James stood behind her like a shadow of the confident man I'd raised alone after his father's death. His shoulders were hunched in defeat, his eyes fixed on the floor as he prepared to choose his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you've got to find a new place to live." The silence that followed was profound. 23 years of single motherhood. Countless nights working double shifts to pay for his education. The down payment on this very house, a gift I'd given them to start their married life. All of it reduced to this moment of casual cruelty delivered over Sunday roast. I nodded once, my expression calm despite the ice forming in my chest. "Then you'll want me gone quickly. I'll be out tonight." Sophia blinked in surprise. She'd expected tears, begging, dramatic protests that would give her ammunition for future conversations with her friends. Instead, she got the one thing bullies never know how to handle: quiet acceptance from someone who had already begun planning their destruction. "Good," she said, recovering her composure and smiling like she'd finally swatted an irritating fly. I excused myself from the table and walked upstairs to pack. My life, I discovered, fits into fewer boxes than most people would expect. A carefully curated wardrobe of black dresses and elegant coats. My grandmother's pearls and my mother's jewelry box. A leather briefcase containing documents that Sophia and James had never bothered to read: insurance policies, property deeds, trust instruments, and contracts with clauses designed to protect generous mothers from ungrateful children. I took my personal belongings and left behind everything else: the furniture I'd bought them, the artwork I'd selected, the crystal stemware that had been wedding gifts from my side of the family. Let them enjoy the illusion of ownership for a little while longer. As I waited for my taxi on the front porch, I watched Sophia through the window, arranging fresh flowers in the vase I'd given her for Christmas. She moved through my carefully decorated rooms like a queen surveying her kingdom, completely unaware that she was about to learn the difference between possession and ownership. Once I was settled in my hotel room, I made a single phone call to my godson, Dominic Hayes, a successful property manager who owed his first business loan to my financial support 15 years earlier. "Aunt Layla," he said, using the title he'd called me since childhood despite our lack of blood relation. "What can I do for you?" "It's time, sweetheart," I said simply. There was a pause as he processed my words. Dominic knew about the Adams Heritage LLC arrangement I'd established when helping James and Sophia buy their house. He knew about the lease-to-own agreement they'd signed without reading. Most importantly, he knew about the breach clauses that would void their tenancy if they ever showed hostile conduct toward the beneficiary, meaning me. "I'll knock Wednesday morning," he promised. 9 a.m. sharp. "Thank you, darling." "And Dominic? Bring the locksmith." After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and reviewed the legal documents one more time. James and Sophia believed they owned that house because I'd allowed them to believe it. The deed had always been held by Adams Heritage LLC, a shell company that existed solely to protect my interests while maintaining the illusion of its independence. They'd signed a lease-to-own agreement tucked beneath pages of welcome home paperwork, complete with breach clauses that I'd prayed I'd never need to enforce. Disrespect toward the beneficiary terminates the option to purchase. Hostile conduct voids occupancy immediately. Utilities operate under a master service agreement that I control. For 2 years, I'd watch Sophia systematically exclude me from family gatherings, roll her eyes when I offered help, and treat my generosity like an obligation rather than a gift. I'd bitten my tongue and tolerated her behavior for James's sake, hoping she might mature with time and responsibility. Today, she'd called me an old witch and banished me from the home I'd provided. Tomorrow, she would learn that some witches have more power than others imagine. I slept well that night, knowing that in 36 hours, the natural consequences of cruelty would arrive at their door wearing a suit and carrying eviction papers. Some people learn respect through kindness. Others require a more direct education. Tuesday morning brought the kind of clarity that only comes from making a decision you should have made months earlier. I woke in my hotel suite, ordered room service, and began the methodical process of documenting every cent I'd invested in James and Sophia's comfortable life. The ledger made for sobering reading. Down payment on the house, $85,000. Furniture and appliances, $23,000. Wedding expenses I'd covered when Sophia's parents claimed financial hardship, $31,000. Monthly gifts to help with their mortgage, utilities, and lifestyle, approximately $2,800 per month for the past 2 years. The total came to just over $200,000. A sum that represented not just money, but trust, love, and the foolish belief that generosity would eventually be met with gratitude instead of contempt. I'd raised James alone after his father died in a construction accident when James was only 12. There had been no life insurance, no savings account, no safety net except my determination to give my son every opportunity one could provide. I'd worked 60-hour weeks as a legal secretary while putting myself through night school to become a paralegal. Every promotion, every raise, every financial milestone had been motivated by my desire to build security for the two of us. When James met Sophia during his final year of college, I'd welcomed her with open arms. She was pretty, well-educated, and seemed to make my son happy. When they announced their engagement, I'd offered to pay for the wedding because Sophia's parents, a teacher and a mechanic, couldn't afford the elaborate celebration their daughter demanded. When they started house hunting, I'd quietly arranged the financing through Adams Heritage LLC, structuring it as a lease-to-own agreement that would eventually transfer full ownership to them after 5 years of on-time payments and maintained good standing. I'd wanted to give them the pride of homeownership, while protecting myself from the kind of legal complications that can arise when family members are involved in property transactions. The breach clauses had been my lawyer's idea, a safety net I'd hoped never to use. Family dynamics can change, he'd warned me. You need protection if relationships deteriorate. I dismissed his concerns at the time. James was my son. Sophia would surely grow to appreciate my support once she matured and settled into married life.
How naive I'd been.
The signs had started small, Sophia forgetting to invite me to dinner parties. Comments about how I was interfering when I offered to help with household projects. Subtle digs about my age, my style, my opinions delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. I'd attributed it to new marriage stress, pregnancy hormones, the natural adjustment period that comes with combining families. I'd made excuses for her behavior and compensated by being even more generous, thinking that kindness would eventually win her over. Yesterday's cruelty had finally opened my eyes to the truth. Sophia didn't dislike me despite my generosity. She disliked me because of it. My support made her feel diminished, dependent, less than the independent woman she wanted to believe herself to be. Rather than acknowledge her gratitude, she'd chosen to resent me for providing what she couldn't provide herself. And James, my son, whom I'd sacrificed everything to raise, had chosen to enable her cruelty rather than defend the mother who'd given him everything. They wanted me gone? They would get exactly what they'd asked for, along with all the independence they claimed to crave. I spent Tuesday afternoon visiting the utility companies, the HOA office, and the property management firm. As the beneficial owner of the property through Adams Heritage LLC, I had the authority to make certain adjustments to their living arrangements. The conversations were brief and professional. I need to revoke the authorized users on the master utility account for 1247 Maple Street. The HOA violations have been ignored for too long. Please issue formal citations for the visible trash receptacles, unauthorized signage, and noise complaints. The property management agreement needs to be activated immediately. Have Mr. Hayes begin the inspection and compliance review process. By evening, the foundation of their comfortable life had been quietly, legally, and irrevocably altered. They would notice the changes immediately. Utilities don't shut off instantly. HOA fines take time to process, and property management companies work on business schedules. But the wheels were in motion, and momentum, once started, becomes very difficult to stop. I had dinner at the hotel restaurant and reviewed my calendar. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation that would end their illusion of security forever. In less than 24 hours, James and Sophia would learn that actions have consequences, that cruelty carries a price, and that some doors, once closed, can never be reopened. I ordered a second glass of wine and toasted my reflection in the restaurant window. To boundaries, to consequences, and to the satisfaction of watching ungrateful people discover exactly how much they took for granted. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp winter air that makes everything seem sharper, more defined. I woke early, dressed in my best navy suit and pearl necklace, and prepared to watch 2 years of careful planning reach its inevitable conclusion. At 7:30 a.m., I called Dominic to confirm our timeline. "Everything's ready, Aunt Layla," he assured me. "Process server, locksmith, and moving truck all scheduled. The paperwork is ironclad. They have no legal standing to contest the eviction. And the utilities? Master service agreement terminated at midnight. They'll have basic service until Friday to gather personal belongings, then complete disconnection." I felt a moment of satisfaction mixed with sadness. It shouldn't have come to this. If Sophia had shown even basic respect, if James had maintained some loyalty to the mother who'd raised him, none of this would have been necessary. But they'd made their choice when they branded me a witch and cast me out. Now they would live with the consequences. At 8:45 a.m., I positioned myself in the coffee shop across the street from the house, with a clear view of the front door and driveway. I wanted to witness this moment, not out of cruelty, but because sometimes you need to see justice served to believe it's real. At exactly 9 a.m., Dominic's black sedan pulled up to the curb, followed by a white van marked County Process Server and a locksmith's truck. The precision of it was beautiful in its own way, legal machinery operating exactly as designed to protect property rights and enforce contracts. Dominic walked to the front door with the confident stride of someone who knows the law is on his side. He was handsome in his charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase that contained documents capable of destroying someone's entire world. He knocked 3 times, firm, professional, unmistakably official. Through my window, I watched James open the door in his pajamas and bathrobe, clearly annoyed at being disturbed so early. His expression changed rapidly as he took in the formal procession on his doorstep. The process server with her official clipboard, the locksmith with his toolkit, and Dominic with his businesslike demeanor. I couldn't hear the conversation from across the street, but I could read the body language perfectly. James's confusion giving way to alarm. Sophia appearing at the door, one hand supporting her pregnant belly, her face shifting from irritation to shock to growing panic. The process server stepped forward and began reading from her documents in the clear, measured tones that turn ordinary moments into legal proceedings. I knew every word of that notice because I'd helped craft it. Due to breach of covenants including hostile conduct toward the beneficiary, your tenancy and option to purchase, are hereby terminated. Surrender of premises is required immediately. Locks will be changed within 24 hours. That's when Sophia grabbed the doorframe and her legs gave out. Even from across the street, I could see the dark stains spreading across her light-colored pants as her water broke on the front steps. The timing was extraordinary, not planned, not manipulated, simply the universe providing its own dramatic punctuation to the morning's events. James began shouting. I could hear his voice, but not his words. Sophia was crying, doubled over in pain and shock. The process server continued reading the legal documents with professional detachment while the locksmith calmly unpacked his tools. And then Dominic pointed to something in his briefcase, the property deed that showed Adams Heritage LLC as the legal owner, with Layla Adams as the beneficial party. I watched James's face go white as understanding finally dawned. The house wasn't his. Had never been his. Every payment they'd made had been rent, not mortgage payments. Every improvement they'd planned had been to property they didn't own. Sophia was having contractions on the steps of a house that was being repossessed while she gave birth. I finished my coffee, left a generous tip, and walked across the street. You said you didn't want me here while you were pregnant, I told Sophia as I approached the chaos. I heard you. She looked up at me through tears and pain, her face a mixture of agony and dawning comprehension. Layla, please. I'm calling an ambulance, I said calmly, pulling out my phone. That's the extent of my involvement in this situation. While we waited for the paramedics, James tried to push past Dominic into the house, as if going inside could somehow change what was happening. The process server stepped smoothly in front of him, her clipboard becoming a barrier backed by the full weight of the law. Sir, you no longer have legal access to this property. You may gather personal belongings under supervision, but you cannot enter without permission from the property manager. This is my house. James screamed, finally finding his voice. Dominic opened his briefcase and removed the deed. Owner of record, Adams Heritage LLC. Beneficial owner, Layla Adams. You are tenants whose lease has been terminated for cause. The ambulance arrived with its cheerful efficiency, transforming our legal drama into a medical emergency. The paramedics loaded Sophia onto a gurney while she gripped the doorframe and begged me with her eyes. Please, she whispered. Please, Layla. I called the ambulance, I replied. That's my limit. As they wheeled her away, I noticed she was still wearing the diamond earrings I'd given her for Christmas. The ones she'd complained weren't quite the style she'd wanted. How fitting that she would wear my gifts while being evicted from my property. The locksmith had already begun changing the front door lock. The sound was surprisingly delicate. A series of small clicks that would prevent James from ever again walking casually into a home he'd thought was his. Dominic handed James a single sheet of paper. You have 24 hours to remove personal belongings. Personal items only, and only what you can carry in 2 supervised trips. We have a baby coming, James said desperately, as if biology could override contract law. You have a notice to vacate, Dominic replied with the patience of someone who dealt with difficult tenants before. I stood on the sidewalk and watched my son discover what it meant to have no power, no options, and no one to blame but himself for the choices that had led him there. By noon, the house was legally mine again. By evening, new tenants would begin moving into the master bedroom where James and Sophia had planned to bring their newborn home. Justice, I reflected, has its own sense of timing. Beautiful souls, before we continue with Layla's story, I want to share something important with you. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. This book has helped thousands of women discover that age is just a number, and your most powerful chapters might still be waiting to be written. Don't let anyone convince you that you're past your prime. You're just getting started. Now, let's see how Layla continues to reclaim her power. Thursday brought the satisfaction of watching careful plans executed with clockwork precision. I stood in the foyer of what had been James and Sophia's home, breathing in the silence that comes after chaos has been legally resolved. The moving company had arrived at dawn, following my detailed inventory list. Every piece of furniture I had purchased remained in place: the leather sectional, the dining room set, the king-size bed that Sophia had selected with such entitled excitement 2 years earlier. The only items removed were their personal belongings: clothes, photographs, toiletries, and the few items they'd brought to the marriage from their previous lives. The expensive crib stayed. I'd paid for it with my credit card after Sophia posted an Instagram story about manifesting abundance with the hashtag blessed. The company ledger doesn't recognize social media as legal tender. It speaks in receipts and invoices, and every receipt had my name on it. I walked through each room, noting how empty the house felt without their constant drama. The kitchen, where Sophia had complained about my interference when I'd offered to help with meal planning. The living room, where James had avoided eye contact while his wife systematically excluded me from their lives. The master bedroom, where they'd whispered about how to limit my involvement in their marriage. All of it was mine now, legally and completely. At 4 p.m., my new tenant arrived with 2 neat suitcases and the kind of quiet competence that comes from years of working with people in crisis. "Mrs. Adams? I'm Isabella Martinez, the NICU nurse you spoke with." She was exactly what I'd hoped to find when I'd contacted the hospital's Human Resources Department about housing for their night shift staff. Mid-30s, professional, responsible, and completely uninterested in drama or complications. "Welcome, Isabella. Your room is upstairs, the master bedroom with the ensuite bathroom. You'll have full access to the kitchen and common areas." She glanced around the beautifully appointed house with appreciation, but not covetousness. "Thank you. This is perfect. I work 3 12-hour shifts per week, mostly nights, so I'll be very quiet during the day." "That sounds ideal. You'll find the house is quite peaceful now." As she carried her belongings upstairs, I felt a deep satisfaction settle into my bones. The room where James had once slept as a child, where he'd brought his new wife to play house with my money, now belonged to someone who understood the value of honest work and mutual respect. That evening, my phone began ringing. James had discovered that his childhood home was occupied by a stranger, and his panic was palpable even through voicemail. "Mom, please call me back. I don't understand what's happening. There's someone living in our bedroom. Sophia's in the hospital, and we have nowhere to go. Please, I'm begging you." I listened to the message once, then archived it without responding. Begging should have occurred before banishment, not after consequences. The second call came an hour later. "This is insane. That's my house. I grew up there. You can't just throw us out because Sophia said something stupid when she was hormonal and pregnant. Call me back." Still no acknowledgement of what had actually happened. No apology for his cowardice. No recognition that I'd been treated cruelly and unjustly. Just anger that actions had produced consequences. The third call arrived near midnight. "Mum." His voice was broken now, exhausted by a day of discovery that the safety net he'd taken for granted was no longer there. "I know you're angry, but please, we need help. The baby might come early, and we don't have anywhere to take him home. I'll make Sophia apologize. I'll make this right somehow. Just please don't destroy our family. Our family. The family that had cast me out as an old witch. The family that had decided I was unwelcome in their presence while they enjoyed my financial support." I deleted the message and poured myself a glass of wine. From the hospital, a clerk called because bureaucracy moves slowly and systems remember old information. Ms. Adams? You're listed as the emergency contact for Sophia Vale. The baby may need extended monitoring. Should we update the father on the situation? You may send updates to their attorney, I said calmly. Please remove me from all contact lists immediately. The woman paused, clearly confused by the unusual request. Ma'am, are you sure? This is regarding your grandchild. I'm quite certain. Thank you. I hung up and added another note to my legal file. All hospital communications to be handled through third parties. No direct contact with patients or family members. The baby would be fine. Hospitals are equipped to handle complicated births, and Sophia was young and healthy despite her dramatic tendencies. But their assumption that biology would override their behavior was just another miscalculation in a series of poor choices. I spent the evening updating my insurance policies, changing my will, and establishing a trust fund that would provide for my grandchild's education and housing needs at age 25, payments to be made directly to institutions, never to the parents, and only if the child maintained no contact with me until that time. They'd use their unborn baby as a weapon to justify their cruelty. I was ensuring that the child would have opportunities despite their parents' failures, while making certain those opportunities could never be manipulated or controlled by James and Sophia. As I prepared for bed, I could hear Isabella's quiet footsteps upstairs as she prepared for her night shift at the hospital. The house felt peaceful in a way it never had when it was filled with tension, resentment, and ungrateful voices. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more desperate attempts to guilt me into reversing the natural consequences of their choices. But tonight, I slept well in my hotel bed, knowing that justice was not only served but residing comfortably in the master bedroom of the house they'd thought was theirs. Some lessons can only be learned through loss. Some people only appreciate what they had after it's gone forever. James and Sophia were about to get a very thorough education in both concepts. Friday brought the kind of systematic dismantling that only comes from years of embedded financial dependence finally being severed all at once. I woke early and made a series of phone calls that would complete the process of removing myself from every aspect of James and Sophia's comfortable life. I need to remove James Vale and Sophia Vale from my family phone plan, effective immediately. I'm canceling the auto insurance policy for the secondary drivers on my account. Please remove the additional cardholders from my credit cards and close their access to the family checking account. Each conversation was brief, professional, and final. The customer service representatives expressed appropriate sympathy for what they assumed was a typical family dispute, offering solutions like temporary suspensions or cooling off periods. No, thank you, I replied to each suggestion. This is a permanent change. The beautiful thing about financial interdependence is how invisible it becomes until it's gone. For 2 years, I'd quietly absorbed hundreds of small expenses that made their lives easier. The family phone plan that saved them $60 per month, the insurance discount that came from being on my policy, the credit card that provided emergency funds when their budget ran short. They'd grown accustomed to these benefits the way people grow accustomed to electricity, completely unaware of the infrastructure that makes their convenience possible until the power goes out. By noon, their phones would stop working. By evening, their car insurance would lapse. By Monday, they discovered that the credit cards they relied on for unexpected expenses no longer functioned. But the freeze was just beginning. I spent the afternoon at my bank, closing the joint account I'd established for emergencies and terminating the automatic transfers that had supplemented their income for the past 2 years. The monthly deposits of $2,800 that had covered their mortgage shortfall, utility overages, and discretionary spending would simply stop flowing, like a river suddenly dammed at its source. The financial advisor who helped me restructure my accounts was professionally discreet, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. Are you sure you want to liquidate all the family trust provisions, Ms. Adams? These changes are difficult to reverse. I'm completely certain. Please also remove the beneficiary designations for James Vale and any future spouse or children. She nodded and made notes in my file. And the new beneficiaries for your estate? I'd given this considerable thought over the past 2 days. 50% to the Children's Hospital Foundation, 30% to the Women's Legal Aid Society, 20% to Isabella Martinez, with a notation that she provided excellent companionship and professional service during my final years. The advisor raised an eyebrow at the last designation but said nothing. Isabella didn't know about her future inheritance, and she wouldn't until after my death. But the young woman who worked nights to help newborn babies deserved security more than the adult children who'd cast me out. My phone had been ringing constantly since the previous evening. 17 missed calls from James, 12 from unknown numbers that were probably Sophia calling from the hospital, and 3 from numbers I didn't recognize but assumed were friends or family members trying to mediate on their behalf. I listened to none of them. After 48 hours of silence from me, James had apparently reached the bargaining stage of grief. His latest voicemail was particularly illuminating. Mom, I've talked to Sophia, and she's really sorry about what she said. She was just stressed about the pregnancy and didn't mean it. She wants to apologize personally as soon as she gets out of the hospital. We can work this out. Please just call me back so we can fix this mess. Still no acknowledgement that the mess was their creation. Still no understanding that calling me an old witch and banishing me from their lives had consequences beyond hurt feelings. Just assumption that an apology from Sophia would magically restore their access to my resources. I deleted the message and added a note to my phone settings. Block all calls from James Vale and Sophia Vale. Route any attempts to contact me through my attorney's office. The next phase of their education was about to begin. Saturday morning brought a call from the storage facility where James and Sophia kept seasonal decorations and furniture that wouldn't fit in their house. The unit hadn't been paid for in 3 months, and my automatic credit card payment, another invisible subsidy they'd forgotten about, had been canceled along with their account access. Ma'am, we've been trying to reach the renters, but their phone numbers aren't working. The unit goes to public auction on Monday if the balance isn't settled. I'm no longer responsible for that account, I said calmly. You'll need to resolve it with the renters directly. But ma'am, your credit card has been covering the payments. Not anymore. I hung up and made a mental note to visit the public auction. Some of the items in that storage unit were family heirlooms I'd given them. My mother's china, my grandmother's antique dresser, wedding gifts I'd purchased for them. It would be satisfying to buy back my own generosity at bargain prices. By Sunday, the full scope of their situation was becoming clear to them. James left increasingly frantic messages as each support system failed in sequence. No phone service, no insurance, no credit cards, no family financial backing, no storage unit, and no place to bring their newborn baby home. His final voicemail of the weekend was a masterpiece of panic and self-pity. Mom, I don't understand how you can do this to us. We're family. Sophia made a mistake, but she's learned her lesson. She's scared and alone in the hospital, and I'm sleeping in my car because we can't afford a hotel. Your grandchild is going to be born into this chaos because you're punishing us for one bad day. Please, I'm begging you, just give us a chance to make this right. I saved that message, not out of sentiment, but because it perfectly captured the moment when entitlement finally encountered reality. They thought family meant unconditional access to my resources regardless of their behavior. I was teaching them that family meant mutual respect, gratitude, and the understanding that cruelty has consequences. The lesson was just beginning. Monday morning brought the kind of crisp satisfaction that comes from watching natural consequences unfold exactly as predicted. I dressed in my finest black suit and pearl earrings, then drove to the storage facility auction with the anticipation of someone about to recover stolen property. The auctioneer was a weathered man who'd clearly seen thousands of families' possessions sold to strangers, and he approached each unit with professional detachment. Unit 247, James and Sophia's abandoned storage space, was third on the morning schedule. I watched from the back of the small crowd as he rolled up the metal door to reveal the contents of their former life. Christmas decorations I'd purchased, furniture they'd inherited from my side of the family, wedding gifts I'd given them, and boxes of photographs documenting happier times when I'd still been welcome in their lives. "What am I bid for the entire contents?" the auctioneer called out. A few casual bidders looked over the items, nothing particularly valuable to strangers, just the accumulated possessions of a young couple who'd lived beyond their means until reality intervened. I waited until the bidding stalled at $75, then raised my hand. 100. The other bidders glanced at me curiously. An elegantly dressed older woman clearly had no need for used furniture and holiday decorations. But they didn't counter, and the unit was mine for less than I'd originally paid for any single piece inside it. "Cash sale, immediate pickup," the auctioneer announced. I handed him 5 $20 bills and received a receipt that gave me ownership of items that had always morally belonged to me anyway. Later that afternoon, I donated everything to a local women's shelter, keeping only the family photographs. Those went directly into a fire pit behind my hotel, where I watched years of carefully documented family memories turn to ash and smoke. The photographs from James's childhood, the wedding pictures where I'd smiled proudly beside the happy couple, the baby shower photos where I'd been surrounded by gifts I'd purchased, all of it reduced to carbon and regret. As the last images curled and blackened, my phone rang. James had somehow acquired a working phone and was calling from what sounded like a crowded, echoing space. "Mom, someone bought our storage unit at auction. All of our Christmas stuff is gone, the baby furniture, everything. How could you let this happen?" I didn't remind him that I'd been paying for the storage unit without his knowledge, or that he could have prevented the auction by taking responsibility for his own expenses. Instead, I said simply, "I'm not responsible for your belongings, but some of that stuff was yours originally. Family heirlooms, things from Grandma's house. You gave them to us." "Yes," I agreed. "I gave them to people I thought appreciated my generosity. Clearly, I was mistaken about their character." The line went quiet for a long moment. When James spoke again, his voice was small and broken. "Mom, please. I know we hurt you, but Sophia is getting discharged tomorrow, and we literally have nowhere to go. The baby is healthy, but we can't take him to a homeless shelter. I'm begging you to help us." "You have somewhere to go," I replied calmly. "You can go anywhere you like. You simply can't go there with my money in my car, using my credit, or living in my house. You wanted independence from the old witch. Congratulations, you've achieved it." I hung up and blocked his new number. That evening, I received a letter delivered to my hotel by courier. The envelope was expensive stationery with tiny gold flowers, clearly purchased when Sophia still had access to discretionary spending money. Inside, her handwriting was shakier than usual, probably from exhaustion and postpartum hormones. "Dear Layla, I know I said terrible things to you, and I'm deeply sorry. I was stressed about the pregnancy and worried about being a good mother, and I took it out on you unfairly. You have been nothing but generous and kind to James and me, and I should have appreciated your support instead of resenting it. James told me about the house, and I understand why you're angry. We should have read the papers more carefully. We should have treated you better. I should have thanked you every day instead of complaining about your help. Please don't punish our innocent baby for my mistakes. I know I called you terrible names, but I was wrong. You're not a witch. You're the woman who made our lives possible, and I was too proud to admit it. If you could find it in your heart to forgive me, I promise things will be different. I'll be respectful, grateful, and welcoming. I'll make sure you know how much we appreciate everything you've done for us. I'm scared, Layla. We have a newborn baby and nowhere to go. James is trying to be strong, but I can see how desperate he is. Please don't let your grandchild suffer because of my stupidity. I'm begging you for mercy. Love, Sophia. I read the letter twice, noting the careful phrasing and manipulative appeals to emotion. The apology focused on her stress and fear rather than acknowledging the fundamental disrespect she'd shown. The promise to be different came only after consequences had arrived. The final plea used the baby as leverage, exactly as I'd expected. Most telling was her closing. Love, Sophia. After 2 years of barely tolerating my presence, she was suddenly declaring affection now that she needed something from me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a file labeled "Too Little, Too Late." Some apologies are genuine expressions of remorse that deserve consideration. Others are strategic documents designed to restore access to resources. Experience had taught me to recognize the difference. This one was filed under the second category. December brought news through the complex network of mutual acquaintances that still connected me to my former family's increasingly desperate situation. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 3 houses down from the property that used to be James and Sophia's home, called to ask if I was aware of the disturbing incident that had occurred the previous evening. Your son was trying to break into the house, she told me, her voice heavy with concern. Around midnight. The motion lights came on and scared him off, but the police were called. I thought you should know. I thanked her for the information, while feeling a deep sadness that James had fallen so far. The boy I'd raised had never been perfect, but he'd never been criminal either. Desperation, apparently, could transform anyone into someone they'd never intended to become. The next call came from Dominic. Aunt Layla, I have to file a formal incident report. James tried to pry open a kitchen window last night. The security system caught everything on camera. Do you want to press charges? I considered the question carefully. Pressing charges would create a criminal record that would make it even harder for James to find employment or housing. Not pressing charges might encourage him to try again. File for a restraining order, I decided. 100-yard perimeter around the property. If he violates it, then we'll discuss criminal charges. Are you sure? The video is pretty clear evidence of attempted breaking and entering. I'm sure. The restraining order will be more effective than jail time for deterring future incidents. That afternoon, I received a call from Sophia's mother, a woman I'd met exactly 3 times during the 2 years James and Sophia had been married. Layla, I know this isn't my place, but I'm worried about Sophia and the baby. They're staying in an extended stay motel, and the conditions aren't suitable for a newborn. She made a mistake, but surely the punishment has gone on long enough. Mrs. Patterson, I replied gently, I didn't create their housing situation. I simply stopped funding it. But you could help them get back on their feet. You have the resources, and they've learned their lesson. Have they? Because James tried to break into my property last night rather than finding legitimate employment or housing assistance. There was a long pause. Clearly, Sophia's family wasn't aware of just how low James had sunk in his desperation. I didn't know about that, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. There's quite a lot you don't know about your daughter's situation, I replied, including the fact that she called me an old witch and demanded I leave their lives entirely. I'm simply honoring that request. After she hung up, I realized that Sophia had been carefully curating the story she told her family, presenting herself as a victim of my unreasonable anger rather than admitting the role her cruelty had played in creating their circumstances. The truth has a way of emerging eventually, regardless of how carefully people try to manage it. 2 weeks before Christmas, I learned that James had found employment, a night security position at a warehouse that paid minimum wage and offered no benefits. The job barely covered their motel expenses, leaving nothing for permanent housing, reliable transportation, or the growing needs of their infant son. According to Mrs. Henderson, who seemed to have sources throughout the neighborhood, Sophia was struggling with postpartum depression complicated by their housing instability. The baby was healthy but fussy, crying frequently in the thin-walled motel room and disturbing other guests. She looks absolutely exhausted, Mrs. Henderson reported during one of her regular update calls. Pushing a stroller to the laundromat every other day, carrying a diaper bag, and looking like she hasn't slept in weeks. It's really quite sad. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but not regret. Sophia was experiencing the natural consequences of her choices, not arbitrary punishment. She demanded independence from my interference, and independence was exactly what she'd received. On December 20th, James made one final attempt to reach me. Instead of calling, he came to my hotel lobby and waited for 6 hours until I returned from a shopping trip. Hotel security had offered to remove him, but I'd instructed them to let him stay as long as he remained peaceful. He looked terrible, thin, unshaven, wearing clothes that hadn't been properly cleaned in days. The confident young man I'd raised had been replaced by someone who radiated defeat and desperation. "Mom," he said as I approached the elevator, "I need 5 minutes."
Please.
I looked at him for a long moment, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tremor in his hands that suggested too much caffeine and too little sleep. 5 minutes, I agreed. We sat in the hotel lobby's seating area, surrounded by holiday decorations that seemed to mock their situation. James took a shaky breath and began what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "I know what Sophia said was unforgivable. I know I should have defended you. I know we took your generosity for granted and treated you badly. I'm not asking you to forgive us. I'm asking you to help our son. He didn't choose his parents, and he doesn't deserve to suffer because of our mistakes." It was the first time he'd acknowledged his own role in what had happened, rather than blaming everything on Sophia's pregnancy hormones or my overreaction. "James," I said gently, "you're 28 years old. You have a college degree, work experience, and every advantage I could provide during your childhood. If you can't create stability for your family with those resources, additional money from me won't solve the underlying problem. But we can't afford a deposit on an apartment. We can't get approved for a lease with our credit damaged and no rental history. We're stuck in this cycle where we can't get ahead because we don't have enough to start over. Then perhaps you should have considered those consequences before casting out the person who provided your financial stability." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "You're really never going to help us again, are you?" "I'm going to help your son," I said calmly. "When he turns 25, there will be a trust fund available for his education and housing, payments made directly to institutions, never to parents. He'll have opportunities despite your choices, not because of them." 25 years? James's voice cracked. "You're willing to let us struggle for 25 years? I'm willing to let you experience the independence you demanded. Congratulations, James. You're finally free of the old witch's interference." I stood up and walked to the elevator, leaving him sitting among the twinkling lights and gold ribbon that decorated someone else's happy holiday season. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt with apologies or desperation. Some lessons can only be learned through years of natural consequences. James and Sophia wanted me gone from their lives. They'd achieved their goal more completely than they'd ever imagined possible. January brought a bitterly cold winter and news that James and Sophia had finally found more stable housing, a subsidized apartment in a complex 40 minutes from the city center. The unit was small, the neighborhood was rough, but it was legal and safe for their baby. According to my sources, James had been promoted to day shift supervisor at the warehouse, a position that came with a modest raise and basic health insurance. Sophia had found part-time work at a call center, scheduling her hours around James's shifts, so one of them could always be home with the baby. They were surviving. Just barely, but surviving nonetheless. I felt no satisfaction in their struggle, but no regret either. They were learning skills they should have developed years earlier: budgeting, prioritizing, problem solving without a financial safety net to catch their mistakes. The apartment they'd found was smaller than the master bathroom in the house they'd lost, but it was theirs in a way the previous house never had been. They were paying their own rent, managing their own expenses, making their own decisions about how to allocate limited resources. It was, in many ways, what they'd claimed to want when they'd resented my interference in their lives. My own situation had stabilized beautifully. I'd purchased an elegant townhouse in the historic district, close enough to my former neighborhood to maintain connections, but far enough away to avoid accidental encounters with my former family. Isabella had become more than just a tenant. She was the kind of thoughtful, appreciative companion I'd hoped to find in a daughter-in-law. She left thank you notes when I provided fresh flowers for the common areas. She offered to cook dinner when her schedule allowed. She treated our shared living arrangement as a privilege, not an entitlement. "Mrs. Adams," she said one evening as we shared tea in the garden, "I hope you know how grateful I am for this arrangement. The peace and quiet here makes it possible for me to do my job well, which helps me save families going through medical crises. And your presence makes this house feel like a home again," I replied honestly. "It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." She smiled and returned to her medical journals. No drama, no manipulation, no demands for additional support. Just two adults who understood how to coexist with respect and appreciation. In February, I learned that Sophia had suffered a setback with her postpartum depression, requiring a brief hospitalization that disrupted their fragile stability. James had been forced to take unpaid leave from work to care for the baby, setting them back financially just as they'd begun to build momentum. The information came through Mrs. Henderson, who seemed to have developed a network of neighborhood intelligence that rivaled any government agency. "I heard from Sophia's mother that she's doing better now," Mrs. Henderson reported. "But the medical bills and lost wages really hurt them. They're behind on rent again." I made appropriate sympathetic sounds while privately noting that this was exactly the kind of crisis that would have once prompted a panicked call to me for emergency funding. Now, they would have to solve it themselves or accept the consequences of their inability to do so. The baby, according to all reports, was healthy and developing normally. I'd established protocols to receive updates about his welfare through third parties, ensuring he was safe without creating opportunities for his parents to manipulate my concern into financial support. In March, James made an unexpected appearance at my office building, waiting in the lobby until I finished a meeting with my financial advisor. He looked better than he had during our previous encounter, cleaner, more composed, though still carrying the worn-down appearance of someone living paycheck to paycheck. "I'm not here to ask for money," he said as soon as he saw me, apparently anticipating my first assumption. I waited for him to continue. "I wanted you to know that we're doing okay. Not great, but okay. Sophia's getting better. The baby's healthy. I got another promotion at work. We're making it on our own." "I'm glad to hear it," I said, and meant it genuinely. "I also wanted to tell you that I understand now why you did what you did. We took everything you gave us and never said thank you. We treated you like you owed us support instead of recognizing it as the gift it was. We were selfish and ungrateful, and you had every right to cut us off." It was the most mature statement I'd heard from him in years. "Understanding is the first step toward growth," I replied carefully. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he continued. "I know that's not possible. But I wanted you to know that we're learning to stand on our own, and maybe that's what we needed." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. What I saw instead was exhaustion, humility, and the kind of hard-won wisdom that only comes from genuine struggle. "How is your son?" I asked. James's face lit up despite his obvious weariness. "He's amazing. Walking now, getting into everything. He laughs when I come home from work, like he's genuinely happy to see me. Being his father it's the best thing I've ever done. For a moment, I felt the sharp pain of everything I'd lost along with everything I'd gained. A grandchild I'd never held, milestones I'd never witnessed, the family connection that had been severed by cruelty and pride. But the moment passed, replaced by the steel-hard certainty that some choices cannot be unmade, some words cannot be unsaid, and some relationships cannot survive certain betrayals. "I'm glad parenthood suits you," I said simply. He nodded, understanding that this was as close to warmth as our relationship would ever approach again. I should go. Sophia's waiting in the car with the baby, and parking's expensive here. After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the city bustle below my window and thinking about the strange mathematics of family love. How it can be infinite and finite simultaneously, unconditional until it suddenly isn't, strong enough to survive anything except the one thing that finally breaks it. James and Sophia were learning to survive without me. Good for them. I was learning to thrive without them. Even better for me. Beautiful souls, I want to pause here in Layla's journey to share something important. Life teaches us that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let people experience the consequences of their choices. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, explores this difficult truth in depth. It shows you how to set boundaries that protect your heart without becoming bitter, how to love from a distance when closeness becomes toxic, and how to find peace when family relationships can't be repaired. Over 100,000 readers have found healing through these pages, learning that you can choose peace over chaos, dignity over drama, and self-respect over keeping others comfortable. Click the link in the description and discover how to reclaim your power. Now, let's see how Layla's story concludes. April brought an unexpected crisis that would test the boundaries I'd established and the resolve I'd built over months of maintaining distance from my former family. The call came at 3:17 a.m. from a number I didn't recognize, always a sign of trouble in the modern world. "Ms. Adams? This is Dr. Mitchell from Children's Hospital. I'm calling about your grandson, Thomas Vale. He's been admitted with severe pneumonia, and his condition is critical." My heart stopped. Despite everything that had happened between his parents and me, the baby was innocent. The careful distance I'd maintained suddenly felt like a chasm that might cost an innocent life. "How critical?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. "We're not sure yet. He's only 14 months old, and his immune system is still developing. We're doing everything we can, but you should know that his parents listed you as emergency contact for medical decisions if they become incapacitated." "Are they incapacitated?" "No, but they're very young and very scared. They specifically asked if we could reach you." I arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, still in my night clothes with a coat thrown over them. The pediatric ICU was a place of hushed voices and steady beeping, where tiny patients fought battles that should never have been necessary. I found James and Sophia in the family waiting area, both looking exactly like what they were, terrified young parents facing a crisis beyond their control or experience. Sophia was crying silently, clutching a small teddy bear. James was pacing, his hair disheveled, and his hands shaking. They looked up when I entered, and for a moment, all the anger and hurt and pride fell away. There was only a grandmother and two parents united in fear for a child's life. "Layla," Sophia whispered, and I heard genuine gratitude in her voice, not manipulation, not calculation, just relief that someone with experience and resources had arrived to help shoulder their burden. "Tell me what happened," I said, sitting down beside them. James explained through tears and exhaustion. Thomas had developed what seemed like a simple cold 3 days earlier. By yesterday evening, he was struggling to breathe. They'd brought him to the emergency room, where doctors discovered that the infection had progressed to severe pneumonia requiring immediate intensive care. They say the next 48 hours will tell us whether he'll be okay, Sophia said, her voice breaking on the words. I looked at these two young people who had hurt me so deeply and saw only parents drowning in fear. Whatever anger I still carried seemed suddenly petty in the face of a baby's fight for life. What can I do? I asked simply. The next 2 days blurred together in a haze of medical consultations, insurance paperwork, and the strange intimacy that comes from sharing a crisis with people you love despite everything that's gone wrong between you. I used my contacts to ensure Thomas received consultation from the city's top pediatric pulmonologist. I handled the insurance complications that arose when treatments exceeded their coverage limits. I arranged for meal deliveries so James and Sophia could remain at the hospital without worrying about basic needs. Most importantly, I sat with them during the long hours when there was nothing to do but wait and worry and hope. On the second night, as Thomas's condition began to stabilize, Sophia approached me in the hospital cafeteria where I was nursing my fourth cup of coffee. "Layla," she said quietly, "I know this doesn't change anything between us, but thank you. You didn't have to help, especially after everything we put you through." I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I'd never seen before: genuine humility. Not the strategic apologies she'd offered when she wanted something, but the raw honesty of someone who'd been stripped down to their essential humanity by fear and exhaustion. "He's my grandson," I said simply. "That doesn't require thanks."
It does, though.
"We treated you horribly, and you still came when we needed you. That's more grace than we deserved." She was right, and we both knew it. "Sophia," I said carefully, "I'm glad Thomas is going to be okay. But this crisis doesn't erase what happened between us. I can care about his welfare without resuming a relationship that was harmful to all of us." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I finally see what we lost when we pushed you away. You're not an old witch. You're a woman who loved us enough to let us face consequences we needed to face, even when it hurt you too." It was the first apology that sounded like genuine remorse rather than strategic manipulation. Thomas recovered fully over the following week. His young immune system, given the support it needed, fought off the infection and returned him to the healthy, energetic toddler he'd been before the illness. I visited him twice more in the hospital, not to reconcile with his parents, but to satisfy myself that he was truly well. He was a beautiful child, James's eyes, Sophia's smile, and a personality that was entirely his own. Watching him play with his toys while his parents hovered anxiously nearby, I felt the bittersweet ache of loving someone I could never fully know. Thomas recovered fully over the following week. His young immune system, given the support it needed, fought off the infection and returned him to the healthy, energetic toddler he'd been before the illness. I visited him twice more in the hospital, not to reconcile with his parents, but to satisfy myself that he was truly well. He was a beautiful child, James's eyes, Sophia's smile, and a personality that was entirely his own. Watching him play with his toys while his parents hovered anxiously nearby, I felt the bittersweet ache of loving someone I could never fully know. On his discharge day, I left an envelope with the hospital financial office containing a check for the remaining balance on their medical bills. Not as a gesture of reconciliation, but as a practical matter. Children shouldn't suffer financial consequences for medical care they need. The envelope included a note: "For Thomas's medical care only. This does not change the boundaries we've established." I didn't say goodbye to James and Sophia. There seemed no point in creating a moment that might be misinterpreted as softening or forgiveness. Instead, I simply left the hospital and drove home to my peaceful townhouse, where Isabella was waiting with tea and the kind of quiet companionship I'd learned to value above all other relationships. "How is your grandson?" she asked gently. "He's going to be fine," I replied. "And so am I." That night, I updated my will to include a provision for Thomas's medical expenses if he ever faced another health crisis. The money would be paid directly to healthcare providers, never to his parents, ensuring that his welfare was protected regardless of his parents' financial situation. I could love him from a distance. I could ensure his needs were met. But I would not, allow concern for his welfare to be used as leverage to restore relationships that had been fundamentally damaged by cruelty and betrayal. Some boundaries exist not because love has died, but because love requires protection from people who would exploit it. 1 year later, I stood in the garden of my townhouse on a perfect spring morning, watching Isabella tend to the flowers we'd planted together. The house had become everything I'd hoped: peaceful, elegant, filled with mutual respect and genuine appreciation. My phone sat silent on the patio table. No desperate calls from former family members, no crisis management, no manipulation disguised as emergency. Just the quiet satisfaction of a life built on my own terms with people who understood the value of boundaries and gratitude. Isabella looked up from her work and smiled. "The roses are going to be spectacular this year. Thank you for letting me experiment with the garden design. Thank you for making this house feel like home," I replied, meaning every word. She was everything I'd hoped to find in a companion. Thoughtful, independent, appreciative without being servile. Our relationship was built on mutual benefit rather than one-sided giving, and it flourished in ways that family relationships often don't because there were no assumptions of entitlement or unconditional support. Through my network of neighborhood connections, I received occasional updates about James and Sophia's progress. They'd moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. James had been promoted again and was taking night classes toward a business degree. Sophia had found steady employment at a medical office, work that used her organizational skills and provided good benefits. Thomas, now 2.5, was reportedly healthy, happy, and developing normally. They'd enrolled him in a quality daycare program, saved money for a reliable used car, and begun building the kind of stable, independent life they should have been working toward years earlier. Most importantly, they'd stopped asking for help from others and started solving their own problems. The crisis of Thomas's illness had apparently been a turning point, teaching them that they were more capable than they'd believed when they'd had unlimited access to my resources. I felt satisfied rather than vindicated by their progress. My goal had never been to destroy them, but to force them to stand on their own feet and develop the character that unlimited financial support had prevented them from building. They were becoming the adults I'd always hoped they could be, just without me in their lives. In June, I received an unexpected piece of mail, a graduation announcement. James had completed his business degree with honors, and the card included a photo of him in cap and gown, holding Thomas, with Sophia beaming beside them. Inside, someone had written in careful handwriting, "We wanted you to know. We're proud of what we've built together." There was no return address, no request for response, no hidden agenda. Just information shared because they thought I might want to know that they'd achieved something significant. I put the announcement in my desk drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a period at the end of a very long sentence. That evening, I hosted a dinner party for Isabella and several colleagues from her hospital. We ate well, laughed easily, and enjoyed the kind of uncomplicated fellowship that comes from people who know how to appreciate good things without demanding more than they're offered. As my guests prepared to leave, Dr. Morrison, the head of the NICU where Isabella worked, mentioned something that caught my attention. "Isabella tells me you've been incredibly generous with the hospital's family support fund. The contributions you've made have helped dozens of families during medical crises." I glanced at Isabella, who looked embarrassed by the recognition. "It seemed like a good use of resources," I said simply. "Well, it's made a real difference. Families dealing with premature births often have financial stress that makes medical stress worse. Your support has helped them focus on their babies instead of worrying about expenses they can't control." After everyone left, Isabella and I sat in the garden with our final glass of wine. You didn't have to mention my contributions to Dr. Morrison, I said. I didn't tell him they came from you specifically, she replied. But he noticed that our family support fund has grown significantly since I moved in here, and he wanted to make sure you knew how much it's appreciated. I nodded, understanding. The money I'd once spent supporting James and Sophia's lifestyle now helped families who truly needed assistance during genuine crises. It felt like a better use of resources that had previously been taken for granted. Isabella, I said carefully, you know you're in my will, don't you? She looked surprised and slightly uncomfortable. Mrs. Adams, I hope you know I'm not here because of any expectations about inheritance. I know exactly why you're here, and that's precisely why you deserve to be remembered in my estate plans. You've given me something I didn't know I needed, a peaceful home with someone who understands that kindness shouldn't be confused with unlimited access to resources. As we prepared for bed, I took one final walk through the house, noting how different it felt from the chaotic, entitled atmosphere that had surrounded James and Sophia during their marriage. This house remembered laughter without drama, conversations without manipulation, gratitude without strings attached. It remembered what family relationships could be when they were built on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. In my study, I opened the drawer containing James's graduation announcement and read it one more time. They'd wanted me to know they were proud of what they'd built together. Good for them. I was proud of what I'd built without them. Some stories end with tearful reconciliations and families reunited. Others end with quiet satisfaction that everyone found the life they actually needed, even if it wasn't the life they originally wanted. I'd wanted grandchildren I could spoil, holiday gatherings filled with laughter, and the warm satisfaction of a family that appreciated my sacrifices. Instead, I'd gotten something better: peace, respect, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to choose dignity over dysfunction. James and Sophia had wanted financial support without accountability, influence without gratitude, and independence without consequences. They'd gotten exactly what they asked for, along with the personal growth that came from learning to stand on their own feet. Thomas would grow up with parents who'd learned to be responsible, self-sufficient adults. When he turned 25, he'd have access to educational and housing support that would give him opportunities his parents hadn't provided themselves. Most importantly, he'd have examples of both failure and recovery, showing him that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of growth. The house remembered everything: the cruelty that had ended one chapter and the wisdom that had begun another. I'd been called an old witch and cast out of a family I'd built and supported for decades. In response, I'd learned to be exactly the kind of witch they should have feared. One who understood that the most powerful magic isn't curses or revenge, but simply allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their choices. They taught me how to end relationships that had become toxic. I'd taught them how to build lives without depending on people they didn't respect. We were all better for the lesson, even if we'd never share another moment of acknowledgement about what we'd learned. The old witch was content in her tower, surrounded by people who understood that magic works best when it's appreciated rather than demanded. And somewhere across town, a young family was learning that the most powerful spell of all is taking responsibility for your own happiness.
Perfect.
Beautiful souls. Layla's story shows us something profound about the courage it takes to choose self-respect over keeping the peace. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. When someone treats your kindness like weakness, don't give them a second chance to prove you wrong. If Layla's journey has touched your heart, if you've ever been taken for granted by people who should have treasured you, then our book Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain is your roadmap to healing. This isn't just another self-help book. It's a comprehensive guide to recognizing your worth, setting unbreakable boundaries, and building a life filled with people who appreciate the gift of your presence. Over 150,000 women have used these principles to transform their relationships and reclaim their power. You deserve to be surrounded by people who see your value, not people who exploit your generosity. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect, not one-sided giving. You deserve peace, dignity, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you'll never again accept treatment you don't deserve. Click the link in the description and start your healing journey today. Your future self will thank you for having the courage to choose yourself. Thank you for watching her true stories. Please like this video if Layla's strength inspired you. Subscribe for more powerful stories of transformation and justice. And share this with any woman who needs to remember that she has the power to rewrite her story on her own terms. Your story matters. Your boundaries matter. And you matter more than anyone who's ever made you feel otherwise. Until next time, keep choosing yourself.